tanarra atunitinde sadof kanenira ubada sabako tikabudan martu ulfina kabaja wala bumang kabdu kanironam kanironam sabako gabruma dan desainnya hahiri rufalma kufudannya dirkama roba cama adu alaga fuardia tahunum fayadu alaga fuardia tahunum fayadu akaniron am it is time to rise up, Akanerun walabo adunya tanarra adunitinde sadof kanenira ubada sabako tikabudan martu habaja ulfina wala bumang kabdu kanironam it is time to rise up kanironam Lubuko damale waregama Kanani mikawan wala buma Kanam toko tierong kanu amma Kanam toko tierong kanu amma Kaniron am Kaniron am It is time to rise up Kaniron am Sabni walabo adunya tanarra adunitinde sadof kananira ubada sabako tikabutan martu ulfina kabaja wala bumang kabdu kanironam it is time to rise up kanironam No, my parents of my nation, they all innocent under the dignity, the freedom hall. It is time to rise up, it is time to rise up, saboo addunyaa tanarraa aduutti deet sadoof kaniniirraa hubadhaa saba koo xiqqaa guddaan martuu ulfinaaf kabajaa walabummaan qabdu haakanu yeroo nam haakanu yeroo nam sabako gabruma dan desaine hahiri rufalma rufudan yadir kamaro bachama adu alaga fuardiya tahunum fayadu alaga fuardiya tahunum fayadu akaniron am It is time to rise up.
Yoya almana ya bikita maratu nagenya keja kawaka ko Oromo da ko ramad de sanada kabu ila David yoya sini jalla Keessummaa addaa sanii qabannee jirra Dr.Trevor Trueman inga abbaa dhugaatii Oromo adii jennaani the white Oromo gaa isaan wajjin turtii guddaa goonaa akkan walii hortabtan abdii guddaa qabna waaquma teenya nu balleessi waan dubbannu nu miidhagsi marii teenyallee nu eebbisi xumura keenyallee waaqni nu tolchinna ga akka abaaboodhaan illee akka waa hundaanuu nu simattan kabajaadhaan isan gaafanna interview keenya afaan ingiliishiin goonaa beebii sagantaa keenya keessatti anurratti ammoo gara afaan Oromoo deebifnee isan hubachiifnaati nu waliin turaan ofirraa teenya. Dr. Trevor Trueman, it is a privilege to welcome you to Shabbo Media. On behalf of the Oromo people, both inside Oromia and across global diaspora, we offer our heartfelt gratitude. You have walked beside Oromo people through some of the darkest chapters in our history. Through your work with Oromo Support Group, your medical service, and your tireless documentation of injustice, you have become a trusted voice and ally. Thank you, Galatomi, for standing with the Oromo people with such compassion, courage, and consistency. We are deeply honored to host you on Shabbo Media today. Welcome to Shabbo Media. Another for Doctor.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, baganagan uduftani Doctor. Afanuma ketin si tifufna Oromo Adi, the white Oromo. You are one of us now. Welcome to Shabbo Media. My first question will be, Doctor. I know over the last 31 years, there are so many reports being prepared by Oromo Support Group. If I'm not mistaken, now we are on report number 69. Report 69 documents more than 6,400 killings of Oromo civilians by Ethiopian government forces and allied militias. How would you describe the scale of the urgency of a current human rights crisis in Oromia?
Well, having been reporting on human rights abuses since
Doctor, you are on the
before.
That's
no,
okay.
Now
it's okay.
All right.
Now it's all right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Having reported on human rights abuses since 1994, and in fact a little before then, before OSG got really underway. Currently, this is the worst that I've experienced. It was bad during 92, 93. But since then, this is as bad as it's ever been. I suppose it was similar to the Red Terror days in the late 1970s, But I think that's the only period when we can say things were as bad as or worse than they are today. I was looking at the number of killings of civilians that OSG reported over a 20-year period from 1992 to 2012, when we stopped writing as many regular reports. And in that time, we recorded just 4,500 extrajudicial killings of innocent Oromo civilians. But since 2018, we've had, it's now over 6,500 that we've recorded. And that's basically 1,000 a year under the current regime. And this is only the tip of the iceberg. We don't see reports of more than 20% of the abuses that occur. I'm sure we don't get any more than a fifth of the atrocities going on. So these are very much rough and ballpark figures, but the current extent of killings appears to be much greater than it was, apart from perhaps the first year of the TPLF when they ousted the OLF from the transitional government in '92. We saw a lot of killings then, but I think it's worse now than it was even in those days when the OLF were being overrun and they were trying to destroy the OLF completely. But we're getting the same pattern of abuses justified by pretending that people have got connections with or support to the Oromo Liberation Army. And it's, as Fikado Testama said a few years ago, that they are drying out the ocean to kill the fish. And it's the civilian population that are really suffering. Back in the late 80s, when I was over there training health workers, most of the abuses were in terms of development and education. The Oromo people were being downtrodden, and most were dying of communicable diseases because they were suffering from lack of development and lack of education. But now there's a direct threat against the Oromo people. The whole of the civilian population is suffering because of three things, really. What the regime is doing in terms of continuation of the standard abuse against the Oromo people, because they're a threat to this authoritarian rule as it was in all the previous administrations. So you've got the continuation of the traditional abuse, if you like. Plus you've got abuses now by Fano in acts of ethnic cleansing all around Amhara region, and of Oromo within Amhara region in Wollo. And then on top of this now, we have the government is subjecting ordinary people to incredible amounts of taxation and looting in excuses for all sorts of, or it's been excused in all sorts of ways, and developing the Kabele offices, feeding the militia, arming the militia, buying uniforms for the militia, road building, health insurance. People are being taxed to access markets. They're being taxed and looted for ridiculous reasons, like renewing their ID cards and renumbering the houses in house clearances. And the ordinary people now are being subjected to so much taxation and restrictions on their daily life that they can't afford to exist. And on top of that, in many areas, certainly outside of Finfinne, there's next to no health service available, and the schools are closing down. The whole of society is crumbling now. It's we have a dog-eat-dog situation where these poorly trained and even more poorly disciplined militia are exerting horrible pressures on the the Oromo population, and impoverishing them as well as committing the most serious, egregious human rights abuses, killings, rape, looting, this sort of thing.
Thank you. My next question will be like in report 68, atrocities in the northern Showa, including beheadings and targeted ethnic violence, mirror past patterns under the EPRDF. What does this continuity suggest about evolving nature of the state of violence in Ethiopia?
It's a continuation of the same old zero-sum ideology for politics, where there is no discussion, there is no democracy, there is one way, and that is of the absolute tyrant in charge. It was bad enough under the TPLF, but now it's several degrees worse than it was in those days. And as I say, we have the problems with Fano as well as the government. Fano is not just what we may perceive as the racist, supremacists, Amhara forces, but there is a government Fano, similar to the government troops that are masquerading as the Oromo Liberation Army. But the government Fano are behaving just like the other Fano groups in their degree of hatred and hostility to Oromo, whereas the government Ola is diametrically opposed to the true Oromo Liberation Army. But both the groups, the government Ola and government Fano, exist to deepen a wedge between the Oromo and the Amhara people. It seems to suit Abiy Ahmed to keep these communities at loggerheads and fighting each other. And it's very difficult to counter this with the amount of disinformation going around and the beliefs widely held within Amhara region and by Amhara people about the Oromo. And it's education that we really need, and to demonstrate to people that what the Oromo want is not the same play with different actors, the same old zero-sum way of running things, but a true change in the system so that everybody is represented and everybody is treated fairly, as is in the Oromo DNA in terms of its cultural heritage. So there's a lot of work to do, but I believe that times will change. We will see an improvement if we can get dialogue going between Oromo and Amhara.
Oh, thank you. My other question will be, there is some confusion among Oromo diaspora and international community as well, unfortunately. Especially in relation to the current regime, some might characterize them as an Oromo government. From your understanding and the perception of international community, did this regime somehow, some Oromo individuals been in the government or in the power, did that make it a little bit complicated and cause confusion also among international communities? And how would you characterize the current regime? Can we call them an Oromo government, or what do you take on this?
We absolutely cannot call this an Oromo government. There are Oromo people within it who are benefiting from it at a personal level. But the Oromo people as a whole are worse off now than they were before Abiy Ahmed's government. This government is responsible for some of the worst abuses against the Oromo. And it's a complete fallacy to say that this is a government which represents Oromo interests. It does not at all represent Oromo interests. And in fact, it's taken the Oromo development as a people back several several decades in terms of the freedoms and rights that they have.
From your understanding, why they came from Oromo, okay? I could understand TPLF, maybe they have been from minority group, perhaps whatever method they developed to sustain their power or to defend their position. But these people, they speak Oromo, they are from among Oromo. Why they couldn't change the trend? Why they couldn't be representing their people? Why they couldn't have a different course than EPRDF? Because now they don't even worse than EPRDF. Perhaps why they couldn't change? Is it something to do with being serving under the past regime and that habit didn't let go that habit, or what's your understanding why they have to do the same mistake like EPRF did when they speak Oromo, when they are from among the own Oromo people? Why Oromo become so difficult for them even than TPLF handling the Oromo?
It's difficult to understand, but I presume the people like Abiy Ahmed and Shmelis Abdissa are people who've grown up under the EPRDF system, and they've relied on trickery, lying and abuse in order to get to the positions that they are in. And that is the pattern of behavior that they've been trained to follow. And it's a human trait, greed for wealth and greed for power. And these individuals have developed that to a very high degree. Abiy Ahmed may do some extremely foolish things, but he's a very talented and sly campaigner for his own ends. And he has duped a lot of people into believing that, at least to begin with, that he was a force for good. And it was an Oromo academic that recommended him for the Nobel Peace Prize, if you remember. But what a big mistake that was. So yeah, we were all fooled. Everybody wanted things to be better, and so they tended to think that this new voice of Abiy Ahmed was going to make things better. But we should have relied on our common sense. Somebody who grows up in that evil sort of security system of the EPRDF can hardly be expected to be a saint. And he was just very good at manipulating people, including foreigners. He was involved with prayer meetings with senators in the USA who said this is the new Messiah for Ethiopia. And how wrong could we be? The one senator who was endorsing him, he stood for the Senate on three things. He was God, guns, and gays. He was anti-gay, pro-guns, and pro-God. And he is the man who had prayer meetings with Abiy Ahmed and proclaimed him the new Messiah for Ethiopia.
Wow. My other question will be targeting of Oromo youth, especially Kero activists, has intensified in recent years. Why do you think this remaining is such a central focus of this regime? Why they fear young people?
Yeah, Abiy Ahmed, and according to Mukesa Gemechu, during an early ministerial meeting, Abiy Ahmed announced, I think it was early in 2019, that the Kero are his number one enemy. They're more dangerous than any armed group, he said. And this is because they had the force of right on their side. They were pro-democracy, they were pro-peace, and they were the real force for change. And in fact, as we all know, they are the reason that Abiy Ahmed had the chance to rise to power. It was only because of them that the EPRDF crumbled as soon as it did under Haile Mariam. And he was correct in saying that the Kero movement was a very strong enemy to his progress back to authoritarian rule. And that's why he targeted Kero right from the get-go. And there was some violence during the week that the OLF came back to Finfinne. If you remember, there was killings of people in Burayu, and they cleverly blamed that onto the Kero movement. And at every opportunity, the Amhara media machine and the Prosperity Party media machine have been very quick to blame the Kero movement and then Ola, when it got stronger, for every injustice and mass killing in Ethiopia. And in fact, it's always been other groups responsible, either Fano or the NDF itself, that have been responsible for the atrocities that they blamed onto Kero and onto the Oromo Liberation Army.
Beyond killings and arrest, we see displacement, forced conscriptions, especially these days, and economic marginalization. What are the broader consequences of these multi-layered abuses on the future of the Oromo society and in general to the Ethiopia as well? Can Ethiopia handle more problem? Oh, yeah.
It's difficult to see how we could handle a worse situation. The whole population is being impoverished. The whole population is being brutalized and getting used to a chaotic, lawless, dog-eat-dog situation with militias acting as parasites on the population, depending on the ordinary people to feed themselves. They don't get paid enough, and they need to be corrupt and taking money off people in order for them to survive and feed their own families. But the level of chaos and lawlessness now is much, much worse than it was under the EPRDF. There was some sort of discipline under the EPRDF, but now it is corrupt to the core, the local administrations and the district administrations. And their militias are acting with complete impunity. And it is a lot worse than it was under the EPRDF.
At the moment, also the economic condition is even getting worse. I don't know who's going to bail them out, but from what we see, there's a protest now by doctors, health professionals in Ethiopia, and there's teachers. They are, the inflation and things are more complicated. From political, now we're moving to the even more dire situation, like the economical one. Do you think will be justifiable for a regime like this, for international community to come and bail them out? And because look what they, from what our understanding over last, like they in Oromia and in Tigray war, over 70 billion USA dollar being wasted, and with this kind of record, is any justification for the International Monetary Fund or any international institutions to bail out a regime that have this kind of record?
The IMF and the World Bank are falling out with Abiy Ahmed his main support now is through the United Arab Emirates, is it not? Rather than the international, so-called international community. And I don't think we can, or he can, expect more support from the EU and the United States than he's had. It's getting less, in fact. Especially with Donald Trump now pulling the rug out from under a lot of international aid organizations. Every Ethiopian regime ever since Menelik has relied on international support to keep it alive. The EPRDF were the second largest recipients of US aid globally for decades. Now it's changed a little bit, but Ethiopia has always been very dependent on its foreign backers, and now people are less reluctant to support it, apart from the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia, and to some extent China doing its infrastructure projects. But the situation now I see as being very unstable, much more unstable than it's been since OSG has existed. And I do not think it can survive for very much longer. It's increasingly unstable, increasingly corrupt, and increasingly weak. And the fact that they are forcibly conscripting children as young as 11 now into the armed forces is a sign of its weakness. And the way they're going through villages demanding so many people per kabele to be joined into the armed forces, and then charging people to release them from forced conscription. It's very, very unstable, and I cannot see it surviving for that much longer, although some people reckon it will. But my personal opinion is that it will not last much longer in terms of years anyway.
I mean, like you mentioned, United Arab Emirates, from my understanding, every country they involved for their own geopolitics, they always do a very messy job, even for themselves. Look their record in Yemen, look their record in Sudan, perhaps also Libya, and we could have even more. Do you think the United Arab Emirates...
You look at the influence of any foreign country in African countries, it's always been bad.
I think they're true, and I guess some have a good experience. Some are good experience in doing a little bit better for themselves at least. But United Arab Emirates, in always wherever they involve, they seem to lead the country to evolve to even worse situation. Look what they did with Yemen and Sudan. Do you think, from and the heavy involvement also in Ethiopia, might lead to same scenario like Sudan and Yemen?
Well, and Somalia, of course, is the worst example that we can think of. We don't want to see Ethiopia going the same way as Somalia did after Siad Barre. It seems to me that the UAE, the Emirates, are very keen to develop their influence over the Red Sea ports, either side of the Red Sea, and to therefore have some control over international trade and gold. I think these are what the aims of the UAE and Saudi Arabia is, to use their money now to buy off structures that will keep them in good financial health for years to come when the oil runs out or when oil isn't so lucrative for them. So the whole trade around the Middle East and the Red Sea, I think, is their priority, and therefore Ethiopia is a prime target for them, both in terms of its markets and in terms of its exports and in terms of its access to ports and port authorities.
Overall, like from late 1980s, from your involvement with around Oromia and Sudan border, and then later on your involvement with OCG you formed 1994 till 2025, how would you evaluate the Oromo peoples, even though I know situations are getting worse and worse, but even within that, do you see a hope? Do you think the Oromo people are more determined than ever before? How do you evaluate their cause on international stage and also the resistance also in local level and the grassroots level?
Well, a hero of mine, Ngasa Kumsa, once said the Oromo struggle is like a huge cooking pot. It takes an awful long time to get going, but once you've heated it up, there's no stopping it. And I think that applies to Oromuma. The consciousness within Oromo people is greater now than it's been for centuries. And I think what Oromo people all have in common, this in their DNA, the belief in democratic values and accountability and the rule of law and equality and inclusiveness, the ability to work with other people. These are qualities that have not gone away, and they are the ones that could rescue not only the Oromo, but the whole of the Horn of Africa from the current chaos that it's in. Noam Chomsky always used to say, if you say there is no hope, you guarantee there is no hope. And that to me seems the right approach. And there are good reasons for us to be hopeful. As I say, the consciousness amongst the Oromo now is greater than it's ever been. The confidence in use of the Oromo language. And when I started in all this, it was difficult to speak Oromo in Finfinne without looking over your shoulder. But now, the language of Finfinne is Oromo. And that's a huge change in the last 25, 30 years. So I think things will change, and whatever we do, it's going to happen that the Oromo will be calling the shots and will be looking after their country. Within, well, I'd like to say within my lifetime, but I don't know how long that's going to be. But it certainly will not be decades away from now before the Oromo have some degree of self-determination anyway. In the short and medium term, yes, things look awful. But beyond that, I think we have good reasons to be hopeful. There's huge problems ahead, obviously, but most of these can be solved with dialogue and understanding with the other peoples in the Horn. And the Oromo are very good at doing that if they can be given a chance to put their point of view, argue their point of view in a peaceful way, and to educate the people who surround them and who suppress them at the moment.
Thank you. The other question is, over last 30 years, is how do you evaluate the international community in relation to the Oromo Oromo causes. Do you think still there's a blind spot, or is it getting better and you get more reception in the different countries? How they viewing the Oromo causes and the human rights abuses in Ethiopia at the moment?
Yep. Well, firstly, don't expect the international community to care about human rights abuses anywhere in the world. Certainly not in this day. Look at the genocide going on in Gaza, and what has the international community done about that? Nothing. So we cannot look outside for the solutions. The solutions will have to be from us, from the Oromo. Oromo self-confidence, self-awareness and consciousness have increased remarkably in the time that I've been involved. But as their problems are getting more recognition amongst people in Europe and North America, so is the backlash against that. The people with a vested interest in seeing Ethiopia only through Amhara eyes, the Amhara script, the language, the Ethiopian Orthodox religion. And the people who've got an agenda of keeping that Amhara supremacism going, and there's quite a backlash now of disinformation coming from that sector, trying to prove that the Oromo are the disinformation machine of the Amharas and of the Prosperity Party is in full gear. And we have to be aware of that and to make, to behave knowing that there is a lot of disinformation about, to be prepared to contradict and to explain when people don't get it right. But there is more understanding of the Oromo point of view now by interested parties in Europe and the States. But as I say, that has brought with it a backlash of increased disinformation. So we must be confident, but still be active in terms of promoting the message and also contrasting with the disinformation that's going around, trying to explain how other forces are deliberately misleading international commentators. Even that brilliant book by Tom Gardner about the Abbey Project, which is wonderfully well written and well researched. But you can see in that even that intelligent writer who's been in Ethiopia for a long time, even he has got this hidden, he's absorbed some of the bias against the Oromo that is prevalent throughout international media. Everybody is seeing Ethiopia still through an Amhara lens, which needs to be dispelled with.
We almost concluding our program. I know it's a bit late for you, and I do apologize. I don't want to keep you longer. Just maybe one or two questions. One is the Oromo refugees condition in Saudi Arabia. Because the dire situation in Oromia is forcing a lot of Kairos to migrate from the country. So some of them are still in Somaliland, Puntland. Some of them are in Djibouti, in Yemen, in Saudi Arabia. Everywhere they seem to be being pushed, and I don't think governments are caring for its citizens wherever they've been abused or arrested or mistreated. I don't hear much of voices from the government side or from Ethiopian embassies. As OCG, how much are you guys able to one, how much you are aware of the Oromo refugee situation in Saudi Arabia, Yemen, Djibouti, Somaliland, and Puntland? And two, are you guys able to talk to these refugees, and what would be like the shared experience of them having emerged from this? From these interviews, like from information you have, what's their common experiences, how they've been treated throughout these countries?
Well, when I first started getting testimonies from refugees, there was a trip to Kenya in 2010, and then Somaliland and Djibouti in 2011, and South Africa in 2012, and then Egypt in 2013, and also 2022, went back a couple of years ago. And it's remarkably similar. People are not economic migrants, they're fleeing from human rights abuse. That's the first lesson. Two, globally, the treatment of refugees has deteriorated over the last 20, 30 years. UNHCR is not the organisation that it was. It's not staffed by the same idealists as it used to be. It's for a lot of people that work for UNHCR, the refugee agency now, it's a career thing rather than done out of altruistic motives, wanting to really help people. And everywhere, in West, East, wherever you go, refugees are given fewer rights now, and they're less well looked after now than they've been in my lifetime. And there's been a real swing to the right with populist politicians, and the easiest scapegoat to go for are the refugees. And this happens in Somaliland, especially since that memorandum of understanding just over a year ago with this idea of a port. But for some reason that was associated with increased hostility to Oromo refugees there, and in Puntland, and in Somalia itself. And in Djibouti and Somaliland, now there are plans to get rid of undocumented migrants. They've put a warning out a few weeks ago in Djibouti that they're going to be rounding people up and sending them back over the border to Ethiopia. And we've seen this in the horrific detention facilities in Saudi Arabia a couple of years ago, where despite them depending on immigrants for labour, despite them depending on that labour market, they treat their foreigners abysmally, locking them up in lethally unsanitary conditions a couple of years ago in Saudi Arabia, in detention facilities, where they were starving to death, dying of infectious diseases, and being carried away in body bags in numbers. But fortunately, that seems to be a little bit better now. But the Americans bombed a facility in Yemen just a month or so back, which killed over 68 immigrants in a detention facility there. And there was barely a squeak of that in the international press. It seems that nobody cares for refugees these days. And the abuses against, it's modern slavery really in the Middle East. People from Ethiopia, including mainly Oromo now. But the dangers that these youngsters are putting themselves through in order to get to Saudi Arabia, in Yemen, and crossing the Red Sea, there's a huge mortality rate and thousands are dying on the way. And Human Rights Watch, just over a year ago, published a research where they showed that Saudi immigration police were firing on live ammunition on refugees trying to get into Saudi Arabia over the border with Yemen, actually shooting them on sight. And that's, we're pretty nasty to refugees in the Britain and in Australia, but at least we haven't started shooting them on sight yet like they have done in Saudi Arabia. No, it's a very disappointing reflection on the way humanity is going since the swing to the left and in support of human rights and in support of refugees that followed the Second World War and the atrocities perpetrated against refugees there. But since that swing, there has now been a swing in the opposite direction, and all countries, it seems, are less likely to welcome refugees, despite the fact that in the West, we will be dependent on immigration within the next decade or so in order to keep our economies going, because the birth rates are going down. And if we don't allow more people from abroad into our countries, then our economies are going to just pack up altogether. So if people had any foresight, they would now be welcoming and encouraging refugees to come to them, because that's where their economies will develop, how they will develop, and they will depend on people coming in the next decades.
Right. My last question will be in your report. In your report, there was did you guys have a chance to investigate about the killing of Bate Urgeisa, Hachalu Hundessa? What did is OCG had an opportunity to collect evidences, and where that evidence is now pointing to in terms of how and who killed them. Number two, these people are the icon for the Oromo struggle, Bate Urgeisa and Hachalu Hundessa, and then many others. And in the same time also, I want to bring in the Ibrahim Traore phenomena in Burkina Faso. Even though the Oromos losing a lot of potential leaders like Ibrahim, and what would be your advice to have a leadership like Ibrahim to rise among the Oromo Cairo and to conclude the long journey to freedom?
I don't know enough about Burkina Faso to comment on Ibrahim. There is mystery surrounding the assassination of Hachalu. The fact that was followed immediately by a round of arrests of the OLF supporters and leaders, and other political opposition, OFC, at the same time. And the information that we do have is that it was government sponsored. I've heard reports that it might have been through Eritrean commandos that at that time were working with Abiy Ahmed. But I don't know. The killing of Bate Urgeisa, we know for sure that was the Ethiopian security people who did that. There is no doubt whatsoever about that. And his killing and that of Hachalu were particularly hard to bear because they were peaceful proponents of change. Bate was a pacifist, and he only joined the OLF after the OLF had renounced violence. And it was a very, very heavy blow when he was killed. And all of us in the human rights community felt as though well, we've been personally hurt because of that. He was such a model of peaceful negotiation and solving problems by discussion. And I'm only hopeful that his way of thinking will have influenced enough people for that way of thinking to be seen as the way out of the current problems. I forgot the rest of your question there, I'm afraid.
I think you covered it. The other one was about Ibrahim Traore, and there's no much information. I'm just saying, like your word of wisdom for this generation to rise up, to be conscious, to be organized, and to and continue the resistance despite the hardship, despite the dire situations in Ethiopia. Hope is one of the greatest weapons that this generation needs at this moment. So, as a white Oromo, as a father of Cairo, what would be your advice for this generation?
Don't give up and don't hate. Don't be infected by the same disease that other people have. There is no point in deflecting hatred with hatred. You've got to try and understand and explain and educate. But do not give up. The Oromo are on the right side, and it's a question of just keeping going until self-determination happens, and it will.
The other message, the artist Oromo, Kadir Said, he wants to say thank you for your contribution for the Oromo people. And his name is Kadir Said. I think you know Kadir Said.
Yes, he's a lovely. I wrote about him when he was in Djibouti, and I met him, in fact, in Ali Adi refugee camp. And then I met him since he escaped to the USA, which is fabulous. I thank you very much for that. That really cheered me up to hear from him.
Thank you. So that was Kadisi, and many other the other questions. Maybe next, I think we need another program to answer another questions. We're just concluding our program. Dr. Trueman, from the bottom of our hearts, Galatomi, the Oromo people, thank you for your your decades of unwavering support, for giving voice to the silenced, and for preserving the truth when the others try to bury it. Your courage in the face of injustice and your compassion in the face of suffering have not gone unnoticed, as Oromia endures yet another wave of pain and repression. Your presence with us today reminds us that solidarity knows no boundaries. On behalf of Shabo Media and the Oromo Nation, we honor you and remain grateful for your continued advocacy. May your work inspire many more to walk the path of the truth and justice. Galatomi.
Galatomi Ulfatta. Thank you.
ilmaana yaga sagantaa keenya ka Dr. Trueman hojii qabannee ture asumarratti xumuranna qophii kala fakkaatu hawaliin waldachaanutti abbaa keenya Dr. Trueman galatoomii jecha sagantaa kiyya asirratti xumuradha. Thank you everyone.